Okay, the Trojan War, the reality. This little video is dedicated to trying to correct an impression, a ubiquitous story, a mythology in reality about the Trojan War, namely that it was fought by the Greeks in the Mediterranean, now considered to be at a city dubbed Troy, a finding of ruins by Schliemann in Turkey. And even the idea that the Iliad may have been just a novel, an exaggeration, an illusion. So we'll be looking at where Troy stood, why the war was fought, the scale of the war, and indeed the reality of the Trojan War. Achilles storms ashore with a small band of warriors. He looks, yes, remarkably like Brad Pitt. A vast fleet of virtual Greek vessels is coming up behind him. The sands of an immense stretch of beach spread endlessly. A large walled city lies beyond in a desert-like plain. We know we are somewhere, at least in imagination, in the vicinity of the eastern Mediterranean, near the site of Schliemann's great discovery, the great city of Troy. But was Troy anywhere near this region? There are enormous difficulties which still cause scholars to question the very existence of Troy, the reality of Homer's war, the historical accuracy, if not the reality of the Iliad. Schliemann's tiny ruins of a city on the coast of Turkey cannot possibly fill the bill for the city described in Homer. At best, it could have held 2,000 people. As you see, there's just not that much of a space in that city. And there's more to it, but it just isn't big enough. From another perspective, the city was a layered set of ruins. Schliemann's Troy is level 6, but none of the layers, none of the versions of the city are that big. Yet Priam's palace alone is described as having 60 rooms, not to mention the size of the city required to harbor the Trojan fighting force of 50,000 described by Homer. That's 50,000 fighting men. Now you have to add in the families. You're talking 200,000 to 300,000. There is no bay near Troy, with close to the space needed for a fleet of 1,200 ships. This tiny plain from shore to city would have spanned less than 2 kilometers in distance, utterly insufficient for the huge encampment required for an Achaean army of 65,000, or for the great battles between the two armies that took place in front of the city, or for the 11 coastal towns situated upon it, which were sacked by Pitt or Achilles. There is no evidence of the 14 rivers mentioned by Homer in this area. There are none of his numerous springs. There are no snows. There are no fogs. But there is no other city in the Mediterranean region that fits at all. If Schliemann's Troy is Troy, Homer is vast hyperbole at best. If you're a National Geographic, in other words, academia, it is, of course, the latter. It's just hyperbole. So in a typical case of inexcusable academic neglect, Eamon Wilkins' great thesis, where Troy once stood, has been ignored. I've never seen his book or theory refuted. In fact, I've never seen it addressed. Barely. Never. Troy, he said, stood in England, he argued, near modern Cambridge. The great battle, which lasted 10 years and involved over its course perhaps 1 million combatants, took place circa 1200 BC. It was a great economic war fought over the control of tin, the essential ingredient together with copper for making bronze, the critical metal of the age. Helen, as Priam well understood, was only the pretext. It was a war seared in memory. The hills of Gog and Magog, near Cambridge, are yet evoked in revelations to conjure the image of the ultimate battle. But the record, carried orally in Homer's great poem, initially in a Celtic language, ultimately ends up in Greece and is transcribed in Greek, in the poem's original dactylic hexameter, a meter that is, in fact, poorly suited to Greek. It is known that ultimately Celts settled in Western Greek. So this seems far out, but we'll soon see how this could happen. To the historian Thucydides' own skeptical amazement, for we could not see how the minuscule subsistence-based early Greek culture, 1200 BC, could have produced the armies and prodigious logistical effort described in the epic. The Greeks become eventually identified with Troy's besiegers, the Achaeans. How did this identity theft happen? I'll give the surmise before moving to Wilkins' argument. It is 1200 BC. Homer in the Iliad describes great portents in the heavens. As Velikovsky would note, Homer describes great battles. Great battles are depicted between Venus and Mars, battles which may have been far more than myth, that is, massive electrical discharges between the two planets. Velikovsky's thesis in Worlds of Collision was that Venus was ejected from Jupiter as a large planetary body and wandered as a while through the solar system, coming near Mars, coming near Earth, etc., causing havoc for some hundreds of years. At precisely this time, 1200 BC, the great copper mining operation along the southern shore of Lake Superior is suddenly abandoned. Over 500 million tons of copper have been steadily removed by maritime people of considerable sophistication who based their remote operations in southern Wisconsin, a people with an obvious stake in the bronze trade. Something drives them to leave. Simultaneously, great cultures everywhere are about to collapse. There is evidence of sudden climate change, shall we say. The Hittite culture, at the height of its powers, mysteriously collapses. The Mycenaean culture, at its height, is suddenly destroyed. Great cities are in charred ruins. The distinctly non-Asiatic, warlike, horned-helmeted, apparently homeless and desperate sea peoples, described as, quote, living on their boats, unquote, appear in force in the Mediterranean. They are on their way to their ultimate defeat and annihilation while invading Egypt. Egypt being one of the few but only partially surviving cultures by Ramesses III around 1175 BC, so about 25 years post-Troy. Depiction of the battle, Egyptian depiction. Some great cataclysm occurred, some event which dispersed peoples everywhere and caused great migrations, leaving Troy and its great war a vague but real memory. In other words, moving the Trojans and the Achaeans elsewhere. Wilkins' arguments are numerous. I cannot and will not do justice to them all. I wish to describe a small, illustrative piece of his discussions. Let us begin with location. Remember the problem with the Mediterranean location. Between the modern city of Cambridge and the Wash, a large bay in the North Sea, there lays the East Anglian Plain. So there's the plain. The Wash itself has the capacity to hold 1,200 ships, and it provides shelters against storms from the west. It would have been exposed to storms from the north, as Homer indeed recounts. Even given its 25-kilometer shoreline, the Achaeans would have had needed to draw the ships up on shore in rows, exactly as Homer recounts. The present shoreline has now moved 25 to 30 kilometers northwards towards the sea. In other words, what's happened is the land has been reclaimed with the help of dikes, but large portions at one time lay as much as 3 feet beneath sea level, or still do. On the plain between the ancient shoreline area and Cambridge, just to the city's northeast, are the remains of 2 enormous earth ramparts, built in parallel 10 kilometers apart, one 12 kilometers long, the other 15 kilometers long. So note, they would have been much closer to the original shoreline, having moved about 2/3 of the way closer to the Wash. There are anti-chariot ditches mentioned by Homer in front of these dikes, facing inland towards the city, as befits the fact that they were built by an invasion force as protection to their encampment. In the Iliad, while Achilles sulks, the Achaeans are indeed driven back to these defensive fortifications. It would have required a massive labor force to move the earth to build these dikes. They are 20 meters high and 60 or 30 meters wide, so they're enormous. The standard estimate of 65,000 to 100,000 men in the Achaean force is derived from the average number of men as related by Homer each ship could carry of the 1,200 ships. The Iliad, a true seafarer's work, is filled with references to the ocean and the tides. The sea is described as gray, black, turbulent, misty, immense. The difference between high and low tide, insignificant in the Mediterranean, is significant in Homer. Ditches were dug, he recounts, to bring the boats on shore, then float the boats out again at high tide. So tides made a great difference. This is not the Mediterranean, but it is a description befitting the Atlantic, its demeanor and the nature of its tides. There are 14 rivers mentioned by Homer in the region around Troy. City names, Wilkins notes, are changed routinely by conquerors. Rivers are not. Their names endure. Homer's rivers yet exist around the Cambridge region. Wilkins' insight into the correspondence of ancient Homeric name to modern name is stunning. Here they are. The pairs, Homeric yellow, modern green, are Aesopus, Isa, Rhesus, Rhe, Rhodius, Rhoding, Granicus, Granca, Scamander, Cam, Samois, Great Usi or Us, not sure which pronunciation is, Satanoi, Little Us, Larissa, Lark, Keister, Yare, Keister, Castle is at its mouth, Thimbra, Thet, Heptaporus, Tove, Cologne, Colne, Chilla, Chillisford, Temese, Thames. Half of these rivers have kept their names virtually unchanged in 3,000 years. A total of 4 rivers were found in the Troy region of Turkey. They were simply dubbed with Homeric names, regardless of the Iliad's descriptions. Here, for example, we see the Scamander, appropriately enough closest to Troy, but then we see the Granicos, see the Satnoi, and the Aesopus. Nice. If we have the plain with its rivers, the bay with its shore, the defensive dikes, can we locate steep Troy? Multiple hills border Cambridge, but a line taken perpendicular to the centers of the 2 dikes and directed south intersects the highest hill in the Cambridge area, a few kilometers from the city. Known now as the Wandoberry Ring, it is part of a plateau called the Gog-Magog Hills. It's roughly 71 to 117 meters or 232 to 383 feet in height. It dominates the plain. Here's another look. And here's another look where we're looking at the mounds, the remaining mounds in the Cambridge region. If you connect them all together, you get this fortification ring with the inner fortification inside. This is taken from one of the only YouTube I could find on the subject, somewhat referencing Wilkins. Titled Trojan War in Britain Was Real. One can find this. Oh, picture up there, Cambridge there's the Cambridge Road with the arrow, and there's up a little bit up in the left-hand corner up there would be where Cambridge University actually is. But other hills can also be located. The small hill in front of Troy, in which the Trojan army gathered before the ramparts or the dikes were built, exists some kilometers to the north, where Batashem village now stands. The Homeric name was Batea, again very close. No rivers crossed the plain of battle, as evident from Homer, and just as evident The battlefield was bordered by the Scamander to the west, as it is by the Cam today. The numerous other important clues that Homer left are all there, as he described. There are oysters, eels, vineyards, springs, thick fogs, snows, poplars, and willows. Not in the Mediterranean. The eels in the River Cam are so numerous. Wilkins notes, the inhabitants of the town of Ely think the name is derived from them. In reality, it is derived from Elos, the ancestor of Priam, whose burrow, according to Homer, was exactly this area. But Homer speaks of the Hellespont, Crete, Egypt, Thrace, Ithaca, Argos, and Mycenae, Pylos and Sparta, and more. How could Troy possibly be in England? Let's go straight to the unifying key. The Trojan War was in essence a war of France and its allies against England and its allies, nearly all Celts. The Achaeans, the formidable enemies of the Trojans, consisted of an alliance led by what is now modern-day France, Argos, in Homeric terms, and which included Scandinavia, Crete, in Homeric terms, Denmark, Aulis, the Netherlands, Phrygia, parts of Germany, Pylos, and Spain, Ithaca. Homer left numerous clues to the identities of these nations, and Wilkins demonstrates how easy it is to mine them. To Homer's contemporaries, these were not clues, they were the then current names. There are in the Iliad list of the 29 Achaean regiments and the cities from which they came, as well as descriptions of the region and mentions of its rivers in other parts of the Iliad. Argos, for example, covered northern France. Towns and rivers mentioned yet exist, such as Orna, Messels, Messi, Aros, Are, Tarfe, Tar. None of these names exist in Greece. Mycenae, the capital of Argos and seat of Agamemnon's rule, itself cannot be found. It is likely to have been a contraction of a name meaning mysteries unseen, a place of Gnostic initiation. Most probably its name was changed to commemorate Agamemnon's victory. It is now Troyes. Agamemnon's kingdom included Egypt, Seine Maritime, after his victory over Thebes, Dieppe, sandy Pylos, the Rhineland Palatinate area of Germany, and Phrygia, northern France and western Belgium. It also included many islands. He was lord of many isles in all of Argos. Though difficult to find today, 3,000 years ago, the sea level was higher. Indeed, there would have been many islands in northern and even western France because it was the ending of the Ice Age. The 7 towns Agamemnon offered to Achilles in the Rhineland yet exist. Cardamile, Cardan, Enope, and I'm not going to go through these names, but and it's difficult to find them en masse, but I'm taking the Wilkins' word for it, that these do exist. Achilles was unimpressed and turned the offer down. They are all on the left bank of the Rhine, exposed to invading tribes from the east. In other words, you had to defend them. Homer's Crete is a land, quote, in the midst of the wine dark sea. It is, quote, begirt with water, and it is 5 days' sail from north of Egypt. 5 days' sail north of Egypt, where sail is about, we'll say about 100 to 120 miles a day with a good wind, especially given the old ships. But the Mediterranean is not the wine dark sea. So you can see the 5 day sail, approximately 800 to 500 miles, is twice or thrice as far as the distance between Crete, the upper map there, and modern Egypt. Depending on where you put your line in Egypt, it's roughly 150 miles, maybe a day plus sail. However, if we're sailing from northern France, there in the bottom, the roughly 500 miles to Bergen, Norway, we've got about 5-day sail, about 500 miles at 100 miles a day. But historians, not for lack of trying, have given up in dismay at ever making Homer's numbers and directions work in the supposed region he intends. It is in the Mediterranean. But Homer's Crete is yet another anomaly. Here we have a picture of, again, Burgundy, Norway. For, he says, I left behind the snowy mountains of Crete, complaining of, quote, wearing cloaks and bright coverlets. In a word, it was cold. It was Scandinavia. Where is this going to be in the Mediterranean? The rivers again tell the tale. Homus Jordanus is now the Hardanger. Arden becoming Harden, the largest fjord in Norway. Nearby is also nearby Celadon is now the Sildafjord. Celadon becoming Silda. For Crete, Scandinavia, the Iliad's list of regiments mentions the river Nisa, now the Nisan of Sweden, the Arna, now the Arna of Jutland, and the Skanus, not likely the Skjern of Jutland. No such rivers are found in today's Crete, needless to say. Of this land, Scandinavia, Homer noted, quote, their tongues are mixed, unquote, and so it is today. You have Norwegians, Swedish, Finnish, Denmark. But this is but a fragment of Wilkins' analysis along these lines. Taken across all the lands Homer discusses, it is overwhelming. The evidence is there for all, but apparently academia to see. As the great migrations of the Achaean peoples took place after that cataclysm, and settlements were begun in the southern climes, because otherwise it had gotten awful cold, the Homeric names were eventually transferred. Egypt, for example, was dubbed so only by Alexander the Great after his conquest in 332 BC. At the time of Homer, it was Misr, Al-Kem, or Kemi, or Merod. The latter meaning is believed those blackened by the sun, an epithet especially apt for Ethiopia, also a Homeric name. The Thebes of the area of Agamemnon's France, known as Egypt, became the Thebes of modern Egypt. Homeric Thebes is now Dieppe. And by the way, there's the Troyes that we mentioned too, that was renamed in commemoration of Agamemnon's victory. The Greeks, like all conquerors, gave familiar names and places to their colonies, and these names are still familiar. Wilkins, I noted, felt that the war was fought for the control of tin, a commodity produced and controlled by England / Troy. It is interesting to consider the other piece of the bronze equation. Frank Joseph, in this book Atlantis and Wisconsin, has described the massive copper mining operations that were carried on along the southern shore of Lake Superior. It was a hidden source that fueled the Bronze Age. In 1840, he notes, 10 wagon loads of stone hammers and tools were carted away from these open pit mines from a single location near Rockland, Michigan. Again, going back to the hidden source. No other really adequate source for copper has been found in the European area. The Indians called these people the Marine Men. In the age over 3,000 years ago, with the Ice Age just ending, one could navigate easily from the ocean and the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes. In many respects, this operation carries the aura of being a trade secret, a secret location of one of the all-important metals of the age. Which side, the Trojans or the Achaeans, was running the operation? It was certainly not beyond the ability of either. Likely, it was the Achaeans. There was the coalition of France and Scandinavia. The navigation certainly was not, as Wilkins shows, in unfolding the hidden code of the Odyssey. That is, Wilkins has another piece of the thesis showing that the Odyssey was actually a coded a map, shall we say, for how to get back to this area. Or was it another group entirely? Were the sea peoples necessarily either the Achaeans or the Trojans? What was the cataclysm that caused the great migrations? Today, the Wanderers Ring near Cambridge is a public park. Some digging was done earlier in 1904. The results were considered hard to date, exceptional. There were clearly fortifications in the area. Some sections have been cemented over. Farmers, pipe layers, and construction workers in the region continue to unearth evidence of dead warriors, weapons, and slain people, though there is no record of a great battle ever having been fought there. And the hills of Gog Magog stand silently before a large plain, upon which stand two immense war dikes, and look northwards toward the wine-dark sea. What lies beneath is as yet buried as Wilkins' brilliant masterpiece. This buried masterpiece must be addressed directly. The arguments met head-on. There's a one-star review on Amazon, registered 3 times for effect, apparently. To sum up, the book is rubbish. Main reasons: the place name correspondence means little to nothing. There's the cool ruins of Schliemann's Troy in Turkey, some questionable Hittite references to a city, the name interpreted to be the same as Troy, or be Troy. An interpretation. Names like Achilles, Hector abounded around Mycenae, so this is where things had to happen. In other words, no need to worry about the tides, the sea, the snows, the fogs, the cold, the actual number of rivers, the actual scale of the war. All of this is meaningless. This is the issue. Either Homer was an extremely detailed, faithful chronicler, or he was an idiot. Which? Pick one. Pick one. If the first, if he was an extremely detailed, brilliant, faithful chronicler, then the cities, rivers, geography, sea descriptions, weather, troop numbers, ship numbers were real. Then you have to find the area to which the text corresponds. Else, you have nothing. And nothing is precisely what current academia has. On the other hand, if he is an idiot, or just a novelist, a spinner of tales, what are you matching anything to, and why? As an idiot, he's describing the Mediterranean, supposedly, yet throwing in snows, fogs, dark seas. What? What's reliable? We have at best only, quote, some war fought somewhere by someone Homer called Trojans and Achaeans. What can actually be taken as true? Nothing makes sense. It's idiotic. Are you going to reconstruct the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War from Gone with the Wind? What sense would that make? This ambiguous, pure intellectual slop is what academia is quite happy with. Why? Because it supports logic like this, the above. That is, again, because we can take Homer as an inkblot, that anything we decide is ambiguous or hyperbole or just untrue or novelistic, we can throw away, and then we can paint any story we want, just like this particular review. Secondly, you must factor in the cataclysmic context of the tale. Some of the cataclysms, just some, that we're starting to learn about. 10,800 BC, the Younger Dryas comet impact, and the extinction of the Ice Age megafauna, the mammoths, the dire wolves. There's an academic faction that is fighting against this event yet, this idea of a comet impact causing this wipeout. And they're losing. See this channel, Prehistory Decoded, for example, a long description of the course of this debate. 7500 BC, roughly, there was comet impacts there appear. See Uriel's machine. 1200 BC or so, well, we know that the Iliad was already describing things going on in the heavens, and that shortly thereafter, indeed, things happened. The charred ruins of the Mycenaean and Hittite cities, from the intense impact of a comet impact, more likely, not via the sea peoples. The sea peoples now, at that time, being so weakened, they cannot defeat the Egyptians. More likely, it was the intense heat of a comet impact that caused these charred ruins. In such a context, abandonment or destruction of cities, sites, mass migrations, histories lost, cultures totally or nearly destroyed, yes, there will be the discombobulation of place names, events in history that Wilkins envisions. But this context is utterly ignored by academia. It must be integrated. The geological, cataclysmic, climate impacts that affect civilizations, and we know occurred, have to be integrated into the history, and particularly of this event. It's time to get real. So next on this little channel, I have one more history topic in mind. That's Gettysburg and Pickett's charge. What really was going on? For the charge is considered a massive waste of life and a piece of stupidity by Lee. Let's see what was really going on. So, till then, signing off.